Hey Chanel, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, Tanya. So good to be sitting and speaking to you today on this glorious Black Labor Day.
I know it's a wonderful day. It's no better day than for me. Every day is a good day to talk about Black workers and our achievements. Let's start off though by I guess introducing ourselves to one another and to our audience. Does
So
that
I
sound
guess I'll
good?
introduce you and you introduce me.
That sounds good.
Let's do it. So I'm chatting today with Tanya Wallace-Gobern, who became the executive director of the National Black Workers Center project in June of 2016. She brings over 20 years of experience in labor and community organizing, and she began her career immediately following college graduation when she joined the Organizing Institute of the AFL-CIO. Soon after that, her desire to organize Black workers led her to work for the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union, a predecessor union of Unite Here. And she moved to the Southeast to help on their unionization campaign in that region. Later, she created the AFL-CIO's historical Black college recruitment program in order to increase the number of Blacks among union leadership and staff. And so for the past 10 years, Tanya has been working for the coalition of Kaiser Permanente unions, including running their field operations. So lots of union labor organizing work here, doing it for the people.
That's exactly right. And let me introduce you to Chanel Craft Tanner, who serves as the director for the Center of Women at Emory University. As the director, she provides executive leadership for the Women's Center and develops and sustains partnerships across the university to establish a shared vision for the center and leads its implementation. Chanel also provides strategic guidance and support across the enterprise to make the university a better place for women and all students. And Chanel is just the bomb. She holds a PhD in women's gender and sexuality studies from Emory University. She also holds a master's in women's studies from Georgia State University and a BA, a bachelor's in government and policies from the University of Maryland and College Park. So, but most importantly, for me at least, Chanel is a founding member of the internationally recognized Crunk Feminist Collective. There she brings her expertise in the areas of hip hop, feminism, U.S. Third World, feminism, Black feminism, cultural studies, and cultural prison studies. And I just think she's an awesome woman. You all are really going to be in for a treat and getting to know her today.
Thank you. So we're here today largely to talk about these Black women demands and what it means for the labor union or the labor movement. And so these were released on the Crunk Feminist Collective website back in June. Cherie Davis wrote these wonderful demands, really thinking about what it is that Black women need. So wanted to get your perspective on the demands and why they're so necessary in this time.
You know, when I first read the demands, I just welled up in tears. I thought that it was just so impactful, the ways that there was the listing of so many people whose lives and liberty have been just snuffed out or taken advantage of. The other thing that just kind of stood out to me that is troubling in the year 2020 is that we are still having demands for health, for peace, and most importantly, the right to live free. You know, there's so much debate going on in our country about Black people and what's happening with Black people, but to think that we're at a point where we still are having to lift up the reality that so many Black women do not live free is troubling to me. And I can't help but say that when I read that piece, it was inspiring also because it really points like a laser on the work that still has to be done. And I'm comforted in knowing that people like Cherie Davis Faulkner are here leading the way to ensure that the reality that we experience now won't be the reality for future generations. What about you, Chanel? What was your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the free part mattered a lot to me. I had watched recently the Nina Simone documentary, What Happened, Miss Simone, and I
Yes.
recall her saying what freedom meant to her was the ability to live without fear. And it just shocked me as like a Black woman, a Black mother, a Black auntie, a Black wife, a Black sister, a Black daughter, you know, that's not something that I can comfortably say that I know what that kind of freedom feels like. And so by putting that, like it's a very, if y'all haven't read this statement, I think y'all should head over to the Crunk Feminist Collective. It's not a very long statement, but it's in those short lines, like something that clear. The right to live free, that there's so much in that. Like for Black women to truly live free, it would mean the dismantling of so much. And so that really spoke to me. I also felt really seen when there was a list of Black women hold all this pain and suffering while organizing, mobilizing, building community, developing strategies, running campaigns, raising children, caring for elders, doing charity, starting organizations, running for office, having loving relationships, shopping, attending school, writing for our lives, working sometimes multiple jobs while also managing the whims and harms of white coworkers and managers, storekeepers and Black managers, principals and superintendents. I mean, the list just goes on, and it's like exhausted just thinking about it, but also really seeing like, yeah, we really do be doing all of that and still trying to worry about ourselves and our lives. So that part of the statement just really resonated with me.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you there, right? We do all of that, and it's part of our norm, right? We don't even think twice about it. Oftentimes we don't blink or have any second thoughts about it, except for when you layer on top of that we do it in this beautiful Black and brown skin, right? The skin that changes the perspective of the people around us who are from our communities, and the complexity and the hostility and the fear and the anger and the mistrust that goes along with that. And so when I think about living free, it's having the ability to live without the fear of how my brown skin will be perceived by others and the limitations that people try to put on us just because of the color of our skin.
No, I think that's absolutely true. I'm also thinking about, okay, so after there was I think it was in Alabama when Doug Jones was running, and you know, afterwards it was like Black women did that, you know, we organize and mobilize, and there's this way that then, you know, all of these folks were like, thank a Black woman today, and you know, really giving us credit. It's like, yeah, and it's like, well, we didn't really do any of this for y'all. Like, you know, like what other choice do we actually have? Like what is the alternative? I don't think there is one. And so yes, of course, when we save ourselves, we save everybody at the same time, but that's not really our goal. We just really trying to live, trying to survive and create a survivable world for ourselves and our children. So anyway, I think it was just a really great statement.
The other thing, Chanel, that I thought about that one, it was like, this is not a slogan moment, right? Because when we look now, that slogan has died out. Who's saying trust Black women now? You know, when Stacey Abrams was running for office, where was the cry to trust Black women then?
She tried to told y'all.
That's right. That's exactly right. So it's got to be. And so that's when you know, for me, that it's not genuine, right? It's a catchphrase, it's a slogan, it's the flavor of the month, if you will. But what we do, what we live through, that's a reality. And so it's what you didn't say this, but one of the things that came up for me is it's important for us to not get caught up in that hoopla, in that swirl, if you will, right? And to keep doing our work, because we know that in order to change, in order to have real change, it's going to take more than, you know, somebody snapping their fingers and giving us a thumbs up or a fist pump in the air, right? Or having a catchy slogan. It's going to mean that systemic change has occurred. And for me, it all rests on how much does a Black woman get paid for the same work that a white man gets paid. And until that's equal, I need more than a slogan. I need my pocketbook to measure to equally to someone else's.
No, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And so maybe we should segue and talk about Black Labor Day and why we're here. And I'm interested to hear why you started that, like what that means to you in this moment particularly.
Yeah. Um, okay, so let's start somewhere else. Let's start. We'll get to that. But just thinking about when most people think about a Black worker, what comes to mind? Just think about those stereotypes. We don't have to call them out, but we know what they are, right? And it certainly isn't innovation, the building of
Yeah.
cities, the building of industry, the arts, right? But the reality is, when you look around you, there isn't a city, a town, urban or a rural community that hasn't been touched by the hands of Black laborers. Too often we hear this negative narrative about Black workers, right? We're unemployed, we're lazy, mostly doing low wage work. And while that might be some of our experience, it's not the sum total of Black work in America. And so we started Black Labor Day 4 years ago because we were looking at the commercials, the hoopla, the articles in the paper about Labor Day, and no Black workers were captured in any of that information that we were seeing. And so we started it to lift up the accomplishments, the achievements, the struggles, and the promise of Black workers. And so, for us, it's really about reclaiming or claiming who we are and what we are, and having control over our narrative. This year, I'm proud to say, I'm showing my t-shirt. It says
Look at
"We
that.
Ready."
We ready. We ready.
We are launching a "We Ready" movement, and this movement says that Black workers are ready to lead the change that we are looking for. That we recognize that what is necessary is a leaderful movement, and not just us looking for one particular person to point us in the right direction. We recognize that in your community, in your workplace, wherever you are, if you recognize something that's not right, that's wrong, then you are exactly the person that we're looking for. You are that leader. And so We Ready kicks off this movement to train people to lift up their voices in a way that is affirming and powerful, and be those leaders in their workplace and their community. And so we're really excited about it. I was saying to someone earlier today, we kicked off a Black Labor Day parade or caravan, since we can't really do parades with social distancing and whatnot. And in Raleigh, our first one ever, we weren't sure who we were going to show up. 50 cars were part of the caravan, and 12 motorcycles were part of the caravan. And it was just a beautiful sight to see people, waving, coming out their doors, asking what's going on, and then chanting with us in unison, "We Black, we work, we ready."
I think that that's wonderful. And I think when you talked about, what do we think about when we think of Black workers and Black laborers, that we don't think about innovation, that resonates with me because I work in higher ed, right? And I'm constantly thinking about the contributions, the ideas. Like, we don't talk about that the ideas that, poor people have brought to this world. Like, if most inventions come out of like the fact that you're using this product, and then you're thinking like, I think we could do this a little bit differently. And so we don't really connect the Black factory workers to some of the ways that they have thought about innovating in the factory, or how, the ideas in the academy that have shifted the way that we think about doing this work. Black feminism, all of that is rooted in labor. It's rooted in labor, and the work that we're doing is making us like move differently, think differently, develop different methodologies. So I'm even thinking about, you talked about me being a part of the Crunk Feminist Collective, and I've been thinking a lot about what collectivity means. And so for us, we realized that the only way to survive the academy is through coming together, creating a crew, creating a posse, and that would provide an insulation from the way that the academy is harmful to women of color, to queer women, to women of different ability status. And so, but we didn't make that up. we got that from our grandmas and them.
That's
And
right.
we got that from our aunties and our mamas, in the way that they've had to collectivize everything just to survive. And I'm thinking about, my grandmother, who took care of us so that my aunt and my mom, could work, right? Like, so that way of collectivizing the childcare and in the labor, just the other sides of the labor movement and the other contributions that we don't always think about.
So, I want you to continue with that. So what exactly is a crunk feminist?
Yeah. So, crunk music in general, it's kind of like this combination of crazy and drunk. That's where the name came from.
I didn't realize
And
that.
so yeah. So, rooted in the South, late 90s, 2000s, crunk music was really big. And the way I think about it, I remember being in college and crunk music would come on and it would clear the floor. At least for me, I was like, let me get out of here, because the guys are jumping around, they're pushing, they're shoving. It was really like not fun. It's like, oh, they were having fun, but it really cleared a lot of the girls. Like, okay, we'll wait until Usher come back on or something, because y'all are doing a lot. But when you combine that kind of energy and feel with feminism, which is always about creating a better world, like another world is possible, the crunkness becomes our method for doing it. And so it's like, enough now, right? And so
Wow.
we're gonna clear stuff out in a way that's maybe seems aggressive, but it's urgent for us. And it also got, a bit of swag and a bit of fun and all of that mixed up in it. So crunk feminist the crunkness is our methodology for how we pursue a better world. Feminism is our theory. And we are not separate from Black feminists. We are not separate from hip hop feminists. It's about all of that. But crunk is just what mattered for us in that particular moment that we were founded. And in the South, most of us met in Atlanta. And so all of that kind of connects to it. But it really is the energy of how we're going to do it. And like, when you see a crunk feminist or someone who, connects with what we're doing, you should know that we come in a wreck shop a little bit. We're coming to clear it out, and we've had enough. So.
Awesome. I love that. So how did you get started? Tell me about, what were your experiences that have shaped who you are and the way that your approach to your work. You talked a little bit about your grandmother raising you. I assume that has a great connection to how you've gotten to where you are now.
Absolutely. And so one of the things someone told me about is like mapping your work legacy or your family tree, but through the work that people did. And so I do that every now and then, or look back at the tree that I mapped to try to remind myself. And so both of my parents were in the military. They were in the Air Force. And so that shaped a lot of my early experiences. And then we moved to New York, and that's where my mother was a single mother then. My parents split up. My mother was on welfare. So that shaped a lot of the way that I think of, in the 90s too, when all of this stuff was coming out about welfare queens. And, we had social workers who came in our house. It was a very degrading experience, but we did, so I went from like born actually into a kind of a middle class into being really poor. And so that's where my grandmother and my aunts, and we all lived in a brownstone together in Brooklyn. And, that really, my aunt worked at the post office. So that was a service kind of work but also had a particular resonance in the Black community, because it meant that she had a car. So we had access to certain things. But I do remember her working very long hours, very long shifts. And, the family kind of taking care of each other. I moved to a little tiny rural town in Virginia called Danville when I was about 12. I moved with my father, and that's a factory town. And, Goodyear tires is there. I actually worked there one summer. It taught me to go back to college. I wasn't about that life, but I appreciated all the family that was doing that. And so we lived through the trade agreements that closed factories down, like Dan River Fabrics, like Bassett, so I saw that, but I also saw unions. So, Virginia has unions, Goodyear has a union. And so I remember when the town would go on strike, and what it meant, you don't cross picket lines, and just the importance of union labor, the importance of the things that people really fought for rights, and the sacrifices that people made. I remember when my father's job, was on strike, and it meant he had to wash cars and make plates and other things to just make it make it through. And so all of that really shaped the way that, even though I work at a desk and I work, I'm directing a center, it really has influenced how I run that, the way I think about, the people. Like my students sometimes love the center so much they want to work even when they don't have the hours to work. And I'm like, we don't do that. Like, you need to be on the clock, and we're not doing free labor here. And so it shapes a lot. It shapes the way that I think about people over products, or what they produce, the care that I try to put into the work, like anything that I'm over, how I try to bring that perspective. But yeah, it's really shaped from being, a child of service workers, coming from a town that is a factory town, and what that means. All of that has shaped how I got here and how I do the work I do. What about you?
Yeah, when you talk about Danville, that brings some memories, and it's interesting how our stories are connected. And so I was born and raised in Chicago, but my parents both are from the South. They're both from Alabama, and they were part of that the Black migration that we've heard about of Blacks moving from the South to the North, looking for basically work and a better life. And so my dad was the oldest in his family. My mom was not the oldest, but towards the oldest. And so there was a lot of responsibility on them. And there was a lot of fear of them moving from small towns in the South. My dad is from a place that's called Sprott. It's like that big one stop sign. And so there was a lot of fear of them moving from these small towns to this big city, and worry that they were going to, to get corrupt and, all kinds of stuff was going to happen to them. But the way that it got manifested in our household was, there was one word that we were not allowed to say. It's like we were guaranteed we were going to get a whipping if we said this word, and it was can't. And in my parents' house, there was no such thing as can't. And they impressed upon us that, my father's side of the family participated in Bloody Sunday. My mother worked in a factory where she ended up running away from home when she was 19 because she couldn't stand it, in Talladega, Alabama, to Chicago. And they impressed upon us how we are the legacy of survivors. And our failure is not an option. There is no such thing as can't. And I carry that through with me. So my parents, both in Chicago, were union members. So I grew up learning about unions. And, it just happened that the Organizing Institute was getting started and came to my college campus to recruit people to go through this program. And this particular recruiter was looking for me because she had heard that I was a student activist, and I became an activist just out of necessity. I will say that the first place that I saw nigger written was at a college campus. The first time somebody called me out of my name was in an institution of higher learning. When I saw it written in the stairwell, I was like, Niger. I couldn't, because I had never seen it before. And I was trying to sound it out to figure out what it was. I didn't go to HBCU, but being in that kind of environment, when Black people are less than 8% of the population on the campus, you quickly figure out what side are you on. And so that was part of my upbringing, and what led me to become a student activist, and subsequently a union activist when I started with the Organizing Institute. I then went on to organize for Act 2, the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union, which is now Unite Here. And that's how I know about Danville, Virginia, because those shops that you talked about were our union shops. And so I'm very familiar with that, and familiar with the strikes that took place. And my perspective is a little bit different because while there certainly was no, crossing of the picket line, and we know how important it is to have that solidarity, I also know from my relationship with the workers of how difficult those decisions were for Black people to go on strike. I am not, I remember working in those mill towns where people, if they went to cash their check, the teller would say, if you want to keep cashing your check here at this bank, you better vote no for the union. or if they
Oh,
went to the
wow.
grocery store, as they were buying bread, if you want to keep getting your groceries from here, you better say no to that union. So I know what a painful, hard decision that was for a lot of Black workers to have to make a decision to either stand up for respect and dignity in the workplace or bow their heads down, just to make a couple of more pennies more than they were doing before. And so my perspective is one of respect for what workers go through when they have to make those decisions, but also one of there's got to be something else in between, right? There's got to be something in addition to an adversarial relationship with your employer. The other thing that I recognize is that you have those protections as a union member when you have a union contract. But what happens if you go to work somewhere else that isn't unionized? Does that mean that you no longer have any kind of worker protection? Does that mean that your work is no longer valuable? I say that it shouldn't be that way. We know statistically that Black people are the people who, want to join a union, and they just don't always have an opportunity to do so. And so part of the way that I do my work now with the National Black Workers Center is really focused on training people to have that leadership ability that you get when you are with the union, even though you don't have union representation. As a union organizer, I would frequently say to my committees and folks that I was organizing, we don't wait for the National Labor Relations Board to come down and hold an election to determine whether or not we will have rights and respect in this workplace, right? There are things that we can do right now. There are protections that we can do right now. And we train people to stand up for themselves, to speak for themselves, to own their own power as employees. Because let's face it, the contracts, union contracts, they aren't worth the paper that they're written on if people cannot enforce them.
I think that was really good perspective because, again, right, I'm a little girl watching this. And so hearing, I saw the sacrifices, but to the extent that you're describing them wouldn't have been something that my parents would have, talked to me about. And so I appreciate that. There was something else that you said when you were just talking that made about like the first place where you saw the N-word was in higher ed. And that's a part of the reason why I stayed in the academy. So I was working on my PhD. It became really clear to me probably within the second year, like, no, I don't think the professorship is really for me. I have this research question and I really want to answer. But then when I'm done with that, I don't think I really want to be a professor. So I started to think about, well, what is it that I could see myself doing? And I had a mentor who said, we were in grad in a class in my master's program going back and forth about, scholars versus activists and the ivory tower versus people on the ground and like, where should we be? And she said, well, the academy is also a site in need of some activism. And so it made me think a lot, about like, that's what I could do. I could run a women's center. I could do something in the academy that's also really trying to shift and change it and make it a place. Because a part of the reason why I didn't want to be a professor is because it didn't really seem like a good place for women and for women of color in particular. It just didn't seem like it was respecting any of the labor union things. It didn't really seem like a good place for mothers to be. It just didn't really seem like I could thrive in that place. So some of it was a push out. I think a lot of people would probably say the same thing if we really sat and thought about why we chose to get a PhD or not, be a professor. But I started to really see my role as trying to make the academy a better place for people who it wasn't really meant for in the first place. It was meant for white property owning men. And so anybody else that has come into it has had to kind of, you feel that difference. And so I see my work as trying to make it a better place, but not just for students, but for staff, for the people who are still doing the work. Somebody had to clean that off of the wall. Somebody had to make sure that you as a student were supported in that. And, for other Black students who saw that, they had to make sure that, that didn't deter you from continuing your education? And then what is the toll that brings on those staff members to be doing that kind of work, but to still be undervalued, underappreciated, overworked, and all of that? So I see my role in the academy as one that's addressing that part too.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate what you said when that individual talked about the need to have activism in the academy. I think for too long, there has been this silo that says that if you're going to be an activist, that's something that you do on the weekends, you know, on your own time, but you don't bring that into this environment or this house or this workplace. But the reality is, if we're going to make real change, activism has to seep and permeate every wall, every institution, every place of employment, if we're really going to bring about real change. So kudos to whomever that was that acknowledged the need for activism. And we're a better place to start, right? Then with students, with young people, right? To impress upon them the necessity of standing up for what you believe in and speaking out, finding your voice and using your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like raging from within, right? Like, how do you make change inside the institution? And I think some of them struggle with that, especially after a summer like what we had, right? And now they're back in school and they're like, well, should I be in the streets? Like, is this really where I'm supposed to be right now? And I think that, like, you're supposed to be everywhere. Like, we need people in the streets and we need people who are in the inside who are pushing, you know, but keep your ear to the streets, keep your ear to that. You know, we're not shunning the work that people are doing, the very important work being out on the streets, but don't think that the work that you're doing here in this moment isn't also really important. And I'm hoping that, you know, more academics see their job as being public intellectuals and translating their ideas, their very important ideas, in ways that we can all understand it. Because I mean, this rise in anti-intellectualism that we're experiencing right now, it surprises me the amount of people in my age group and younger who don't understand the value of unions and the labor movement. And we need people who are working in those field, historians, to combat what is happening on the other side, that's telling us that these things are taking away our right to work, as opposed to actually ensuring that we have safeties and precautions and that people are paid fair wages. And so how do we combat that? I think academics, taking time to study those things and translating it into memes, into tweets, into YouTube video, whatever is working to convince people that these things aren't important, we need to be doing the same kind of work to convince them that it is. We got to battle that. And so I think the academy is a very important place in a time like this.
You know, I want to ask you to expand on something. You talked about the academy being an important place and your students questioning, should they be in this place or should they be out in the streets protesting or demonstrating? How do you understand the importance of place and place making?
I think about this a lot. Running a women's center, it's always strife. You know, people who do this kind of work, these often are places that are underfunded. People don't always see the value in them, and they're threatened to close or merge or, you know, do things that they wouldn't do with the chemistry department, right? And in this moment where everything has been virtual and digital, and we've been able to create really incredible programs, even in the midst of this, a podcast, trivia nights, using our IG Live in different ways, that there's a concern, you know, that like, if we do this too well, will it almost make it seem like we don't need the space, we don't need the lounge, we don't need that room. But I think, you know, Virginia Woolf said it, a room of one's own, right? I think that people do need spaces to be with other people like them. I think that, you know, that's where the consciousness raising happens. I think sometimes it's just over like watching, you know, the Kardashians or something, and you start talking and laughing, and before you know it, you're planning a program, and before you know it, you got posters out and you're marching through campus. So I think place matters. I think so much. I think that we wouldn't be having this conversation with each other right now if it wasn't for these incredible technologies like Zoom. I think that they're superpowers. when we use them like this, right? Like, I think a lot of times we just use it to schedule more meetings, for this capitalist machine. But then there are these kinds of possibilities that are happening. So I'm excited about the ability to think bigger about how technology can bring us together. But I also don't want us to lose the importance of connection and place. So I think making place, creating living rooms is one of the most important things that we need for our liberation. I think we've always needed it. I think we've always needed community with one another. And so fighting for those places and taking care of those places and valuing those places is really, really important work.
That's what's up. I think sometimes when people think about place, they define it as a particular point or position or a location, a city or town, something like that. But there's also, right, place that's defined as a portion of space that's available or designated to be used by someone or something, like a seat, a chair, a position. And so when I think about placemaking, that's where I tend to lean. Thinking about placemaking as the tools and approach that puts the community front and center of where it needs to be. And so that is creating a space where people are safe, where they feel connected, that is welcoming to them, that's authentic to their experiences, that's accessible. And I think that that's what you're doing, with the Academy, right? Making sure that people have a place that is theirs, that they have defined for themselves, and that embraces them, that allows them to create, to build, to envision, and to grow.
Do you feel like that's what you're doing as well?
Most definitely, that's what we're doing. And it's funny that you asked that. When I first started about 5 years ago working with the National Black Worker Center, I went on a listening tour because I wanted to talk to the communities where Black worker centers are. So we are a network of 8 Black worker centers across the country. And one of the things that stood out to me was how either embarrassed people were to talk about the racism and discrimination that they were facing on the job, how some people, younger people, couldn't even name what was going on, and how some people just personalized it and said, why is this happening to me? This was kind of the post-Obama era, and we were supposedly had arrived, and so people were very uncomfortable even discussing it. And last year in Baltimore, we ran our first Working While Black Expo. And I will take this I take this story with me wherever I go. There were 3 women who did not know each other, not connected, who each reached out and asked us, and me in particular, are y'all really gonna do this? Are we really going to have these discussions in public? And when you think about the Black experience, right, frequently it is summed up in some crazy mess happened at your job. You come home to your family, your partner, your friends, whatever, and be like, you will not believe what this mofo said to me today, right? And so what we are doing is going beyond that, right? We are creating a space where people can be comfortable to say, this is what I'm experiencing at work, and it's not right. And it's through telling those stories and that coming together that there is a boldness that is created, right? Some people, there was a fear when we first started doing it that there would be kind of a shrinking, but we've seen the opposite. There is a boldness to say, this is happening to too many of us, and enough is enough. And that's why we've started the We Ready movement, because we believe across this country, Black people are saying enough is enough. We won't relegate our experiences to just these side conversations that we have where we kind of wring our hands and clutch our pearls. We're ready to change the narrative and change our experiences.
How do you keep the focus for the people who you're motivating and training, and they're going out and they're pushing for change? But sometimes those wins are few and far between. And without some kind of victories, it's hard to keep people motivated and So I'm just wondering, like, what do you tell people about the long game, or how to focus on, what you're doing, even if, there's apparent loss?
Yeah. Sheila, that's a good question, because the long game, focusing on the long game sometimes is a way to set yourself up for failure and disappointment. And so when I think about it, it's how do you even get to the success of a long game? It's incremental. It's small wins along the way. And what I say to people is we should expect to fail. We should expect to make mistakes, because it's in the making of mistakes and failing that we learn, that we do a process improvement mapping of our work and where we want to go. If we don't fail, if things don't stay the same, that means we're not doing anything. That means that we're not moving, that we're not growing, and we're not advancing. And so part of it is inoculating people, right? And so when you think about inoculation, that's when you go to the doctor, you get your flu shot to prepare you so that you don't get the flu or know what to expect. And we do the same thing. We prepare people on what to expect. Expect to be attacked. Expect to have your character, questioned. Expect to have some losses. But also, let's define what it means to win. Winning and building momentum to get to that long run. Winning means steps along the way, right? And as long as we stay on our path, we are winning. As long as we're able to bring more people into our movement, we are winning. When one person is able to stand up to their employer and secure safety equipment for themselves, or have conduct a press conference within their community, or train other people, we are winning. The reality is we have to just push back on this interest of having a quick fix. This will not be resolved quickly. It may not be resolved in our lifetime, but what is most important is that we continue with the fight, that we understand the trajectory that we are building. When we think about I just realized that we're C3, so I can't say what I was about to say. But when we think about some of these other movements that are not in support of Black worker and Black power, right? They have been working and developing a strategy that isn't a couple of months long or a couple of years long. It's a 25-year strategy. It's a 25-year plan. And if we are going to be successful, that means that we have got to put in the time that it takes to build our base. And so at the National Black Worker Center, we think of our base in three ways in terms of our focus: the ones, the twos, and the threes. The ones are the early adapters. Those are the folks that you say go, they are ready to jump. The threes are the people who they just are not going to be with you no matter what is going on. It's the twos where we need to focus our attention. That's our sweet spot. Those twos are people that may not consider themselves progressive. Those twos are the people that maybe work 2 and 3 jobs, right? And they don't have time they may not read the paper or the New York Times or anything like that. They're keeping their head down and they are trying to survive. That's our sweet spot. Once we mobilize those twos, it's done. And that's our long-term game, right? And we believe as organizers that build power within communities, we recognize that this happens through building relationships one by one and building bodies of trust, knowing that we can depend on one another, that we've got our backs. My sister's got my back and I've got hers, in order to build something that is lasting.
No, that's really good. That's good. And that's helpful. I'm taking notes so that I can use that as well. I think the work I do is a little harder to even count the wins and the progress. It's almost like I have to see it as I'm planting seeds that I hope will turn into something else, because I'm literally, training future people who I may not talk to again. But I'm hoping that what they gained from, you know, the programs that we put on and from being in community at the center, that it means that when they go out into the world, that they're doing something with that. There are definitely students who are activists on the campus, right? Who are already, some of them come in the door at 17, 18, ready to push. Others are like, they don't really get sexism until they get into the world and experience it. It's hard when you're 54% of the student body, when there are women who are leading all kinds of, you know, clubs and organizations. And then when they get into their first job, then they're like, oh, yeah, I see now.
You upside the head. Yep.
I see now. But sometimes, you know, it's just difficult to get them to know, like, you'll see this later, and you need to get this knowledge now so that you know how to navigate it. But that's kind of how I try to measure my success, is around like what seeds am I planting, being real deliberate about what I'm modeling, what we're reading, what we're trying to give them through the speakers that we bring in, that hopefully will, you know, get watered later, that there's a piece of them that's like, I remember we talked to that person who did stuff around, you know, labor unions, and I want to go back to that. I want to return to what that person said. But it is difficult to measure, you know, what even the incremental wins are, when that may not even start until, you know, 4 years after I've encountered them.
Shana, I just wouldn't underestimate, though, the power of the dialogue and the training and the education and awareness that you are providing to these young women. When you talked about sexual harassment, I thought about my first encounter with sexual harassment after I graduated from college. Yeah. And I did not have that foundation. And I remember calling my one of my girlfriends to say, this guy just really likes me a lot. He want to be my man or something. That was not what was going on. No, until Anita Hill, that I was like, oh, I'm being harassed, you know?
Yeah.
It's again, just being able to recognize it. That's such a valuable tool. If people can just recognize and call out what's going on, that's valuable.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at the time. I guess we have like time for one more question before we open it to audience Q&A. Maybe what's bringing you joy right now?
So I mentioned earlier that we today we had this Black Labor Day parade, and in the midst of social distancing, in the midst of all these protests to reopen the city, in the midst of, you know, unprecedented unemployment expected for African Americans, in the midst of this pandemic, the people who came out smiling and saying thank you and fists raised in the air, just, you know, it was just so beautiful. It was so empowering to see and to hear women just coming out with their children, men coming out as our cars are driving and meandering through the city. People are running alongside, and it just really it touched my heart, right?
Yeah.
To know that we got this. We got this. And I keep saying we ready, but we are so ready. You don't even know. We are just so ready. People are, it's like a switch. All we have to do is flip the switch. And so that gives me joy to know that we are on the right track. The news came out, and one of the folks from our caravan was being interviewed, and then a person from the community came up and was being interviewed, and the newscaster asked her, what do you think this is all about? And she said, it's Black Lives Worker Ready. So she took Black Lives Matter, the Black Worker Center, and We Ready, and just smushed it all into one thing. And that is all good with me. That is all good with me, because that's what we need. We need more organizations, more movements, more people who are just marching to the beat of our own drum. And for Black women, that beat is one that resonates with us all in our hearts and spirits, and it just calls us to act. You started this conversation off with reading this whole litany of the things that we do as Black women in terms of being mothers, daughters, educators, farmers, doing this, doing that. That's who we are. And when we hear that drum, it's like the Pied Piper's pipe, right? We hear it, we recognize it, and we go and we lead and we are ready. And so that gives me hope. I can't not lead this dialogue without giving a plug for our We Ready movement. It is We Ready NBWC.org. You can learn more about what we're doing. Take the pledge to sign up and become to announce that you are ready. And that's what's giving me joy. My people give me joy every day. This conversation gives me joy.
I agree. This conversation is bringing me a lot of joy. And I'm just excited to be doing this on Labor Day. For me, what's bringing me joy is, when I get a little down in the midst of this, it's getting into a space of creativity again. And so that's bringing me a lot of joy, being able to continue to try to make place virtually. And then just the Black creators that are out here doing it. I'm thinking of the Versus battle. That brought me a lot of joy with Monica and Brandy. I was having a lot of joy. I think about the DJs. I think about all the ways that Black people have been innovative in this time. And it doesn't feel like we're doing it for anyone else but ourselves. It's like we all we got. So you got We Ready, and then also we all we got, right? As things that we just have always known that like ain't nobody gonna save us but us. And I just have been just so appreciative of seeing all the ways that we're doing that we're responding to just care for one another. And I love that. That and naps, I've found value in naps. And I never really thought about how revolutionary it was for me to take naps, but I work, and feel like, I always just have so much more to do. And so taking that time to deliberately rest in this moment and to shake off those stereotypes of, Black people being lazy and never doing enough, like being able to recognize where that desire to continue to produce is coming from, and to stop it dead in its tracks and say, you sleepy, take a nap. So those are the things that are bringing me joy in this moment. Okay. I think we may have some questions, maybe from the chat. Oh, there are so many demands on Black women. What are your demands?
What are my demands on other people?
I think what would you add to that list of Black women demands? What would you demand?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is demanding the ability to define the value of my labor, or all Black women's labor. I think that it's so ironic to me when the pandemic first started and we came up with we saw all these businesses thanking workers, and the term essential worker came up and heroes pay came up as if, right, this was a new thing, right? We know that essential workers, 1 out of every 3 essential workers is a woman. And they aren't essential because of COVID. They've always been essential. The only thing that's different is because is that there's a greater spotlight being placed on the services and the goods that we produce as Black women, as essential workers, right? And it's just not lost on by me that prior to COVID, these skills, this labor, this work was undervalued. It was seen as less than, as not worthy, not even worthy for $15 an hour. It was fine for these now essential workers to have to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so that really speaks to not having the ability to define the value of our labor. And I say, if we, let's get rid of this notion that says that some people are less than. and only business owners have the right to make money or decent salaries and provide for their families?
My demand would be that any movement for justice includes demands on Black women's health. I think that, I'm so excited about where we are with Black Lives Matter and this push, around policing and prisons. But as a Black woman, I think that the healthcare system is a system that has really negatively impacted Black women's lives. And so I think that we need to pay attention to that and put some pressure on that so that our health justice, our reproductive justice, all of those things show up with importance. Also, because I'm just I'm always thinking about culture and cultural producers, but that there is more recognition for the contributions that Black women and girls have made. I demand that. It really makes me mad to continue to see the ways that young Black girls are being so innovative on platforms like TikTok and having that labor. And that's what it is, taken away, and other people profiting off of that without recognition. And, that's just one way that happens. We see it in our workforces. We see it everywhere. And so that would be a demand for me as, intellectual property, that we get recognized for all the ways that we've built this place and created the swag. So.
And I think, Chanel, that kind of speaks to the next question that we just saw in the chat. How do we get us Black folks to invest for the long game, even as we know the justice we seek most likely won't happen in our lifetime? And I think that the story that you just told about the young women doing TikTok and being innovative and creating with their own value, their own businesses, right? That's part of that momentum that I'm speaking about. I would also say that the investing in the long game is connected to helping people to step into their own power as leaders. And when we do that, we're able to build movements that can dismantle racist policies and institutions while creating new and innovative alternatives. And I think that, for me at least, that's the long game. That's what we're going, that's what we're headed towards. And helping people to step into that leadership, to run their own organizations, to start their own businesses, to mobilize their co-workers, to have discussions with employers. Those are steps that are necessary that gets us to that end game. And I want to say this because sometimes people may think that this is it's easier said than done. Think about the gains that have been made, or I think about the gains that have been made just because of the COVID, coupled with the atrocities that we've been seeing from the police department. Some things that might be small to some people would be the protective equipment that workers now get. It's not lost on me that for years, workers have been asking for protective equipment and not getting it. I think about the statues, the Confederate statues that are being torn down across this country. I know I live in the South now, I live in North Carolina, I've lived in Georgia. I know about, what those protests have looked like for years, and those monuments have come down. That equipment has happened. I mentioned earlier about hero pay. People have been fighting for $15 an hour, but now suddenly we get it. It's not actually, that we got it because people did, because businesses and leaders decided to do the right thing. It's because people organized, they mobilized, and they protested, and they demanded better. And that's part of that long game. So we have to continue to invest in training people, supporting people to push back and to use their voice to say enough. We want better and we demand better. And I think that I know that people are ready for that. And let's not discredit that that's part of the investment that we all make and can contribute to.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we got to keep our heads on a swivel for when those gains are happening and not let them tell us, that the narrative is, not let them control the narrative. I remember a few years ago, maybe it was last year, I don't know, time is weird now, but where H&M had that image of the little boy, the little black boy in like a monkey shirt. And then, people were like, we're done with them. We're not buying their stuff. And their fourth quarter earnings that year were down. Like the earnings immediately after that were incredibly down. And I'm an H&M shopper for my kids and I didn't buy. But when it came out, they blamed it on so much other stuff. And it's like, or was it because Black people stopped buying H&M? Same with the NFL ratings, right? Like a lot of people are not watching the NFL. They will never say that it's because folks are protesting and boycotting their viewership because of Colin Kaepernick. Instead, it's because, the presidency and people are watching this stuff instead, all kinds of stuff. And so I think we got to know when it's us that did that and shout that out. And also that, like, in the question, it said, knowing that we may not live to see it. It may surprise you. I think a lot about Angela Davis in this moment and all the work that she did for all these years around the prison industrial complex, around creating that framework for us to understand what we're seeing. And she's living in a time where we say defund the police. Like you see that on CNN, on mainstream media. I don't think she thought she would live to see that. I don't think any of us prison abolitionists thought that would be something that we would live to see, but here we are. And so knowing that that's a big deal and we may be surprised, so just keep doing the good work.
That's a really great point. I love what you said about know that it's us, right? And shout it out. So frequently we focus on the negative, right? It's like I talked about the ones, the twos, and the threes. The threes are the negative. We focus on that. We should just lift that up on a regular basis. We should put on t-shirts. We should shout it out. These are our victories. And if we don't claim them and speak about them and teach them to our children in the future, no one else will. No one will tell our story other than us.
Yeah. So that kind of wraps it up for us. I think we have a few shout outs. Shout out to the Crunk Feminist Collective, who I'm representing today. You got some shout outs?
Yeah, definitely. And so one, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Will Empower and Advancing Black Strategists. They brought us together. Shout out to the National Black Workers Center. Shout out to every single Black woman out here who is just grinding and working for our future. We see you, we love you, we appreciate you, and we got your back.
All right, thank y'all. Bye.
Bye.